started when I moved into my grandmother's old house in the countryside. She had passed away a few months ago, and as the closest living relative, the property was left to me. The house was well over 100 years old, nestled deep within a small, forgotten town that seemed to be untouched by time. It was a two-story Victorian home with tall, narrow windows and intricate woodwork that had once been elegant, but now showed signs of decay. The room that most intrigued me was one in the attic, a small, musty room with peeling wallpaper, a single window that let in very little light, and a creaky wooden floor. The previous owners had left it untouched, almost as if they were afraid to disturb whatever secrets it held. I could feel a chill every time I entered the room, but I brushed it off as the house setting or a draft from the old walls. I had decided to make this room my study, where I could work in peace, away from the noise and chaos of city life. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path of terror that I would never forget. The first few nights were peaceful. I'd spend hours in the old room, reading and writing, lost in my thoughts. But then, one night, I started to hear a faint whispering sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps an old pipe groaning somewhere in the walls. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if someone was trying to speak to me through the walls, their voice muffled and desperate. I would get up and search the room, pressing my ear against the cold walls, but the sound would always stop the moment I moved. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the quiet of the night. But the whispers continued, night after night, always starting when the house was at its quietest, and I was alone in the old room. After a week of sleepless nights, I decided to do some research on the house. I went into town and visited the local library, hoping to find some history that might explain the strange occurrences. What I found was chilling. The house had a dark past. It was built in the late 1800s by a man named Charles Whittaker, a wealthy industrialist with a reputation for cruelty. According to the records, Charles had a young wife, Emily, who was said to be beautiful but fragile. She had died under mysterious circumstances, with rumors suggesting she was driven to madness by her husband's abusive nature. The townspeople whispered that Emily's spirit was trapped in the house, her restless soul unable to find peace. Some even claimed that Charles had locked her in the attic room, the very same room I had chosen as my study, until she succumbed to her despair. The house had changed hands many times over the years, with each new owner leaving soon after moving in, citing strange occurrences and an overwhelming sense of dread. After learning about the house's history, the atmosphere in the old room became even more oppressive. The whispers seemed louder now, more coherent, but I still couldn't make out the words. I began to feel like I was being watched, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. One night, as I was sitting at my desk, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror that hung on the wall opposite me. It was just a fleeting shadow, barely noticeable, but it sent a chill down my spine. I stared at the mirror, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but the shadow returned. This time, it was clearer, a dark figure standing just behind me, its features obscured, but its presence unmistakable. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the cold sweat on my skin. I was not alone in that room. Whatever was whispering through the walls was now making itself known. The following night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting the old room. I sat at my desk, turned off the lights, and waited. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the old clock in the hallway below. Then, the whispers started again, but this time, they were different, clearer, more urgent. I strained to listen, trying to make out the words. It was a woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "Help me, help me." My heart raced as I realized what I was hearing. Emily's spirit was reaching out to me, trapped in this house for over a century, pleading for release. But how could I help her? What could I do to free her from whatever torment she was enduring? I spent hours at night trying to communicate with her, asking questions, pleading for her to show me a way to help, but the whispers remained the same, growing fainter as the night wore on until they finally ceased altogether. Determined to find a way to help Emily, I began searching the house for any clues that might lead me to understand her story better. Days turned into weeks as I combed through old boxes, dusty shelves, and forgotten corners of the house. Then, in the attic, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, I found it a small, leather-bound diary. It was Emily's diary, filled with her thoughts, fears, and the horrors she endured at the hands of her husband. Her entries grew more frantic as the pages went on, describing how Charles had become increasingly abusive, locking her in the attic for days on end, refusing her food and water, until she was too weak to fight back. The last entry was the most disturbing. It was written in a shaky hand, the words barely legible. "He's coming for me. I can hear him outside the door. There's no escape, but maybe I can find peace if someone knows my story, if someone knows the truth armed with the knowledge of Emily's suffering." I knew what I had to do. That night, I returned to the old room with the diary in hand. I placed it on the desk and sat down, waiting for the whispers to begin. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The room grew cold, and the whispers started again, louder than ever before. I could feel a presence in the room, a heavy weight pressing down on me. But I stood my ground and began to speak. "I know what happened to you, Emily. I've read your diary. I know the pain you endured, but you don't have to suffer anymore. You're not alone. I'm here to help you find peace." The whispers stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the room was completely silent. Then, I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and light as a feather. I turned around, but there was no one there. Yet, I knew she was with me. Suddenly, the house seemed to come alive, the walls groaning and creaking as if they were being torn apart. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the air, but I wasn't scared. I knew this was Emily's final act, her way of breaking free from the torment that had held her captive for so long. The mirror on the wall shattered, and for a brief moment, I saw a reflection, a young woman with sad eyes, staring back at me with a look of gratitude. Then, she was gone. The next morning, the house felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the whispers were gone. The old room was just a room now, with nothing left of the terror that had once haunted it. I buried the diary in the garden, under the old oak tree where Emily used to sit, according to her entries. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that her story had been told, and that she had finally found the rest she deserved. I moved out of the house shortly after that. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. But I'll never forget the time I spent in that old room, or the voice that called out to me from the walls, desperate to be heard. Sometimes, I wonder if Emily's spirit is still there, watching over the house, or if she's finally found the peace she was searching for. But one thing is certain: I'll never step foot in an old, abandoned house again. The memory of that cold, whispering voice will stay with me forever. A reminder that some stories are never truly forgotten, and that the past has a way of reaching out to us, even when we least expect it.